Hi, I'm Master Curt Frantz. Welcome to Growing Your Sense of Self Through Self-Defense. I first came across the understanding of the connection between these two concepts about 6 years ago when I was training with a friend. At the time I had been training in martial arts for 10 years and studying the sense of self for 20. And when the connection between those two became clear to me, it was a eureka moment. A light went on. It was fabulous. And my goal in this program is to help that light go on for you as well. So my responsibility will be to be as passionate and thorough and precise in sharing this information and the techniques to help you uncover your motivation to immerse yourself in the material. Just like anything else, what you get out of it is directly proportional to how much you put in. So these two concepts, the sense of self and self-defense. Start with describing what the sense of self is. Sense of self is how you think about yourself, your self-esteem, and how you feel about yourself, your self-love. And we talk about, this is well understood and it's pretty obvious that your perceptions define your reality, right? If you don't perceive something, then it's not part of what you believe to be real. But what's not so understood and is more fundamental is that it's your sense of self that directs your perceptions. So it's your sense of self that is defining your reality. And a sense of self is something that's with you 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Even when you're sleeping, it's there. It's helping to shape what it is that your dreams are about. There is nothing that defines you more than how you define yourself, how you think about yourself, how you feel about yourself. It is the major influence of the trajectory of your life. More than anything genetic, anything about your culture, your gender, your religion, your race, any of that stuff, sense of self determines more of the trajectory of your life. It defines the nature of every relationship that you're in, who you're in relationships with, and the nature of those relationships. They grow out of the relationship you have with yourself. The sense of self, if you were to think of it as a graph, is a continuum. There is no lower bound or upper bound. It's sort of like fitness or health. You can always be less healthy or more healthy. Whatever your current state, you can always be more healthier. It's the same with a sense of self. Whatever your current strength of your sense of self, it could always be stronger. And even a little bit of an improvement over the span of your life pays huge dividends. Self-defense. The type of self-defense we're going to talk about in this program, we're going to use in this program, is primarily Hapkido. It's a Korean martial art. It's called a soft or a circular martial art, as opposed to Taekwondo, another Korean martial art, which people are more familiar with, which is a straight or hard martial art, kick, punch, similar to karate, Japanese martial art. In Hapkido, it's circular. A lot of the motions are circular. You're redirecting the energy of the attacker. You're applying joint locks and pressure points. There's striking in it, but that's not the primary thing, and we're not going to be utilizing that. And you'll see why this type of martial art is so valuable for growing the sense of self. And if you've ever seen Hapkido class in any school, I've trained in a few different schools, and at the end of every class, the people who participated in the class will hug the other people who participated, even if they didn't work with them that night. And I'll explain why that is later in this presentation. So I would like to have us do an experiment. I call it a thought-feeling experiment. It grows out of the thought experiment that theoretical physicists do. Albert Einstein, he was famous for doing thought experiments. For things that you cannot recreate in a lab, you just sort of do them in your mind and figure out, well, what would happen? So he'd imagine riding on a light beam, and right alongside him was another light beam. What would that light beam look like? Or he's riding on a light beam away from a clock. How would it look like time is moving if he's doing that? So that's all thought experiments. I'm going to do a thought-feeling experiment where you want to pull your emotions into this experiment. And what I'd like you to do, and I'm going to ask you in a moment to close your eyes, but not right yet, to imagine you have the powers of Superman or Superwoman, the same powers, that you are invulnerable, you cannot be hurt, you're super strong, you can fly, you have X-ray vision, you're super smart, super good looking, all of those capabilities that you have. And I'm going to now ask you to close your eyes. I'm going to leave the tape running, the video running, and I will be back in a minute. Going to let you go through this exercise in a minute. I want you to think of yourself having those capabilities, how it might affect the way you are living your life, situations that you find yourself in right now. If you had those capabilities, how things might be different, how it impacts your sense of self. So if you would like now to close your eyes. And you can open your eyes again. So this is a fun thought-feeling experiment. When I do it with an audience, it's funny to see because you'll see people, their chest will sort of expand and their shoulders go up and back and their head rises and you see a little smile curling their lips, and it's pretty sense of empowerment that's going on. And you can feel the energy that people have when they see themselves with these capabilities. And there's more Superman in you than you may realize, and we're going to show how we can uncover that in this program. Now I'd like you to do a second thought-feeling experiment, and this one's sort of the opposite of that one. And in this experiment, you are not capable of getting your needs met on your own. You depend on someone else to feed you, on their schedule, not on yours, meaning not when you're necessarily hungry. You can't go any place unless this other person or other people take you someplace. They will provide for you in terms of where you're going to sleep and when the opportunities to sleep, those types of things. You may try to communicate with them. They're under no obligation to respond in any manner to however you communicate. You can sort of think of this almost like it's being in jail, but it's worse than that, right? Because you can be really ignored. So I want you to now imagine, go through this thought-feeling experiment. Like you did the first one, we're going to go through this one. I'm going to ask you momentarily to close your eyes. And make this as real as you can. As real as you can. You have no capability to do any of those things. And now think about that and how it affects the way you see yourself, the way you live your life, situations you find yourself in. So if you can now, close your eyes. Okay, you can open your eyes. I did not let that one go a full minute like I did the prior one because it's too distasteful to let play that long. You get a sense of what it is after just a few seconds, right? You don't have to eat the whole rotten egg to determine that it's rotten. That type of environment, I mean, if you somehow, say it was like a jail, or but worse than a jail, and you got out of it, and you weren't in there because you committed some crime, you were just there, through no fault of your own, you were just there. And then somehow you got out of that. Now, the likelihood is you go one of two tracks. You come out of that really pissed off. I mean, it was unfair, totally unfair. You didn't deserve to be there. You were mistreated in the sense that you weren't honored in any way, you weren't respected in any way, and you're pissed, and you don't give a damn about anybody else. You don't care. The hell with them. Look what I had to put up with. I don't care about them. I had to go through worse. I don't care. So you turned into that, a bully, because you don't care. You're pissed. And you could say justly so in some ways, but you know, how you react to other people, maybe not so just. Or you could come out of it, yeah, you know, I must have deserved that. It happened to me. It must have been right. And that's who I am. That's what I'm used to. That's what I now know. And now in this different world, I'll make choices that'll have me living that same kind of way. I become a victim. The bully or the victim, they're two sides of the same low sense of self coin. That type of environment that's devastating to a sense of self. When you come out of that, you're likely to find yourself in one of those types of extremes, or a person, not necessarily you. So I see people, they will sort of wonder about, why did you do that distasteful thought experiment second? Why don't you do Superman second? I can have that nice taste in my mouth instead of this crappy taste in my mouth. And there's a couple of reasons why I did it that way. First one is, that's not just a thought-feeling experiment. That's real life. That's something that each of us went through to varying degrees. And the second reason I do that second is because it leads me into this next discussion, which is, where does the sense of self come from? How is it first formed? Its roots start with consciousness, which means it's starting even in the womb, before we're born. There's the beginnings of the sense of self. When it formalizes in some hard way, the first time, it's deep in infancy. Certainly by the time we're 2. At 2 years old, that's called the first separation individuation phase. Prior to that, we are the world, or I am the world as a child, as an infant. I don't distinguish between mom's a different person than me. No, we're all one thing. Everything that happens is an extension of me. It all happens because of me. I allowed it to happen. I made it happen. Whatever. It's not rational thinking. This is how we are as a young infant. So we are the world. I am the world. By the age of 2, when we first go into separation, first phase of separation individuation, we start to get that, hey, mom is somebody different than me. I start to get that I'm a separate person. I become an individual in a world, in a broader world. Now, I don't fully lose my egocentricity, but I'm starting to get that. It's a process, but I start to get that I'm no longer. But prior to that, everything is me, a part of me, extension of me. Now, think about the capabilities of a newborn infant. They're very limited. They can only do a few things. They can suckle, which allows them to take in food, sustenance, and fluids. They can make these adorable faces and goo-goo eyes and gurgling sounds and things that we find irresistible. We want to love on them. And they can cry when they're not getting a need met. Something's not right. I got something in me that wants to come out. I'm tired. I'm hungry. I'm feeling cold or warm or whatever it is. That's their 3 methods to get their needs met. And we've seen in those experiments, when you can get your needs met easily, Superman powers, you can get these basic needs met, that's a bonus for your sense of self. When you can't do anything on your own, that's devastating to the sense of self. So this child, this infant, has 3 ways of getting their needs met. And not the 3 tools that they have. Now let's think about, if the child can get their needs met and they're feeling, what is it that do they feel right in this world, in themselves, because the world is themselves? Is things warm? Are they loving? Are they nurturing? Is it safe? That's the foundation for a strong sense of self in an infant. Or do they feel the world's cold and it's harsh and it's uncaring and it's maybe even dangerous or hurtful? This comes out of how well they can get their needs satisfied with the 3 tools that they have. And let's think about what the standard child-bearing, child-rearing practices are. And these are not only the norm, in a lot of cases they're the recommended. This is what you should be doing as a parent. New parents should be doing these things. So We often, as a pregnant woman, will imbibe some things that, some drugs, whether it's alcohol or other things for medical conditions, those things go into an infant. The placenta is a bloody sieve. Things just flow through it, and the baby gets what the mommy gets. So they're having to break down drugs with an immature, not fully developed system. So it's harder for them to do that. During childbirth, women now often, maybe a significant majority, is drugged during childbirth. The baby is drugged during childbirth, which interferes with those first moments of bonding. And again, they'll have that problem breaking down the drugs with their system. It'll last longer than it does in a woman. Breast nurturing. It's much more than breastfeeding. We use that word all the time, but that's so limiting in what it's not just feeding. It's much more than that. There's a skin-on-skin contact. There's an eye-on-eye contact that's happening. And there's a giving of more than just food. There's, antibodies and other things that the mother is passing to the child. It is nurturing beyond feeding. So in breast nurturing, in this country, about 2/3 of babies get breast nurtured. Just 2/3. Out of those 2/3, only 1/3 is breast nurtured beyond 6 months. So you're down to like 20-some% of babies being breast nurtured beyond 6 months. Now, to understand what we're physiologically wired to be, because we have so many layers of culture, what you want to do is look at what's called primitive people or other species, primates especially, other apes, and see how those mothers parent, see how those infants are raised. Apes will breast nurture for 4 or 5 years. So-called primitive people, 3 to 6 years. And here we're 20% for 6 months. We will have a room put aside for a baby, their own bed, their own room down the hall or something. Could you imagine a chimpanzee placing their newborn chimpanzee in a tree down a ways a little bit, and I'm going to sleep here and put the baby down there? That makes no sense. We will guide people not to carry the baby around too much. None of that in-arms experience. Put that baby down, you're going to spoil him. Who would do that with a newborn infant? What other species? What other ape? We let babies cry it out. One of their only tools, and we're telling them, you can't, that's not going to be honored, that's not going to be respected. Forget that thing. Cry it out. Become more independent. I mean, they are the world. So if they can't use their tool and nothing happens, or they use their tool and nothing happens, then that's not a useful tool. So they don't have that capability, or not consistently. We lose, in today's world, extended family, so there's a lot of connections that aren't there for a child. And we take these young ones off to daycare or sitters or nannies or something and separate them from their mom, who they're wired to respond to, who they're used to hearing the sounds of while in the womb. And we do all of these things, which are against our millions of years of evolutionary history, our wired physiology. We disrespect, we reject, we do not honor what our nature is. And when you screw with nature like that, there are consequences to pay. And those consequences tend to be in the strength of our sense of self. Those needs, the need for self-love, self-esteem, are not being met when you go through standard, normal, recommended parenting practices. So here you are as a child, forming your first sense of self. This is your first impression. First impressions are difficult to change. This is your very first one, and it's the most important one. It's the one you have about yourself. And this is what it can be. And they're very difficult to change. That your first language, think about your first language, which comes along later than your first sense of self. People can learn other languages. Some people have trouble with that. Others can pick them up pretty readily. Not that hard. But it'd be very, very hard to sort of just expunge the first language that you ever learned. Never use it again. Almost forget about it. That's near impossible. And it's more difficult to change your initial sense of self than it is your initial language. That's more core of who you are. That goes down deeper. It happened before you started your first language. So you don't get a chance to change that sense of self unless you make some active efforts to do so. And as that child, as that infant starts to grow older, and they're in their young years, toddler years, 4, 5, 6, 7, what they see around them, they still carrying this egocentricity. So if they see dad smacks mom, I did that. I caused that. At least I didn't stop it. They see mom fall down drunk, that's my fault too. They get abused in some way as a child. I deserve that. I caused that. I earned that. Imagine carrying that weight as a young child, pre-rational, just getting your sense of being rational. And that's in you now. That's not an easy thing to get rid of. You don't just say, oh yeah, now I can realize that wasn't my fault. No, it doesn't go away that way because it's pre-rational. So this is a very difficult challenge that we have as individuals, as a culture. If you could unitize the sense of self, let's look at height. You could take height and graph a population of heights. And you get the standard bell-shaped curve. Pretty much everybody's average height. You're somewhere within 1 or 2 standard deviation of the norm. There's some outliers to the low side, the shorter people, and there's some outliers to the tall side, some really tall people. But largely people is in the middle. That's the bell-shaped curve for height or weight. If you could unitize the sense of self and graph that, you'd have an inverse bell-shaped curve where there's hardly anybody in the middle, and people are down at the low side or up at the high side, mostly those areas, little in the middle. And the reason that happens that way is because think of a person who's a little bit on the higher side of sense of self, and there's a situation in front of them, they see it as a challenge or an opportunity, say, I think I can do that. I think I've done stuff like that in the past. I can go after that, and I think I'll be successful with that. So they go and they try and they succeed. Yeah, I thought I could, and there's a little bit more pat on their back but internally, and a little bit of a oomph more to the upside. Now, a person a little bit on the low side might look at that same opportunity, challenge, and situation, and I don't know. Maybe I have to do it. I'm not too keen on doing it. I don't know that I can be successful at doing it, but I'll go ahead and try. I know what I expect to have happen, and lo and behold, they fail in this attempt. And it's a push down of the sense of self. So the tendency is, whichever side you're sort of leaning towards, you will move more towards that side, just by natural living. Now, to make a change, to move from one to the other, and because of our rearing and bearing practices, the tendency is we're more on the low side because our tools were not honored. Our physiology was not respected. So we got dealt not such a good hand. To make a comeback from them, it's going to take some effort. There's 3 ways I know of to grow a sense of self. The first way is the one that people generally use, the one that everybody knows about, that's through counseling. You've seen some kind of a therapist, a psychologist, a psychiatrist. And you go into that and try to grow the sense of self that way. Now there's at least 4 innate limitations in that approach. The first one is, when one goes into that, the tendency is, I've got this low sense of self I want to deal with, but it's something I've been hiding all my life. It's a scary thing for me to look at, acknowledge. But here, in order to get this therapy, I'm going to have to stare right at it. And not only that, share it with somebody else who initially is probably a stranger. That's a hard thing to do. It takes a lot of courage, and if my sense of self is kind of low, well, maybe there's not a lot of courage there to get me to go there. So I hold back, and I don't really want to go there, but I sort of have to go there, and it's a difficulty. That's a limitation. A second limitation in addressing the sense of self through therapy, through counseling, is the goal of counseling is typically in this area is to sort of find first causes. Like, let's peel back the layers of onion. You're having this problem, whatever it is, with alcohol or some addiction. Why is that? Well, maybe because of this. And why is that? Maybe because of this. And you're rolling back, and you're looking for sort of first cause. And maybe you find something pretty deep in childhood. But, the likelihood of going and finding original first cause is almost nil. It's very, very rare something happened at a later age that, hey, I know about that, I remember it. If stuff was happening deep in childhood, you don't have memory of that. Not mental memory, maybe bodily memory, but it's not something accessible by reason, through words. So, if, for instance, as you're peeling back onions, you find out, whoa, you come to understand, hey, I was abused when I was 8 years old by one of my family members. Let's say my dad. I was abused by my dad when I was 8 years old. Oh, that's a very traumatic thing. That cuts to the core, cuts to the soul of an individual. Now, what's the likelihood that a father that would do that to their daughter at 8 years old, prior to that, was very honoring of her and very respectful and very caring of that same child? Zero. It doesn't exist. So what were things were happening before then that this child was taking on? Was it being ignored? Was she being ignored? There was some other, maybe physical violence that was engaged, or some verbal violence that was engaged? I mean, finding back to the original cause, which was maybe happening when the child was an infant, is a lost cause. That's another limitation in trying to grow the sense of self through counseling, through therapy. A third one is that approach to addressing the low sense of self relies most heavily on the mental, some like talk therapy. It's talk therapy. Now, there's very little physical. Maybe there's a hold of a hand or a touch of a hand or a hug, a greeting hug and a goodbye hug. And you will get into emotions as you start peeling layers of onions back. Those will come out. So you're working primarily on the verbal, the rational level, and touching into the emotions, and almost no physical and no spiritual levels, or rarely spiritual levels. This is like the worst choice you can have to go after this. I mean, maybe it's the obvious easiest one, but it's the rational. That's the last thing that came along. That sense of self was established the first time before you were even rational. You were pre-rational. We are physical beings before we are rational beings. We are emotional and spiritual beings before we are rational beings. So to try to unlock where this thing got established through just the rational is not going to work. It's not going to be fully effective. It can have some success, but it is going to be limited. That's the third limitation of using therapy to grow the sense of self. A fourth one is it tends to be pricey. It tends to be expensive. You pay a fair amount for each session, and you tend to have a lot of sessions, and maybe they go for years, maybe they go for decades. That's a lot of money, and a lot of people can't afford a lot of money to pay for that. So, the reason why it takes a long time a lot of times is because it's not that effective, or is not as effective as it can be because of these limitations. So there's a second way of growing the sense of self, and that is what I call the generic bottom-up approach. And attached to this video is a link to a list of attributes of a person with a low sense of self and a person with a high sense of self, characteristics. And let me give an analogy. If I wanted to be a mechanical engineer, but I'm not that good at it because I'm not that good with my hands, I'm not that good in math, I'm not that good in science, so I really don't have a chance of being good at a mechanical engineer. However, if I work on being good with my hands, like maybe I wasn't good working with, wood, but maybe if I worked with something different, a different material, knitting this or that or whatever it is, cars, maybe I can become confident and competent in working with my hands. Maybe if I learn math in a different way, there's lots of ways to learn math. If I learned it in a different way, now it's something that I can receive. Maybe I'm not so auditory, maybe I need to be more hands-on with things and get the concepts of mathematics. Similar with science, there's different ways you can approach science. Some will work for some, and different ones will work for others. So you find ways, now you become skilled with your hands in math, in science, and guess what? You can become a mechanical engineer. It may take some additional training, but you've got the tools now for it. With a sense of self, if you've got the traits of a sense of self, by definition of a high sense of self, you are a person with a high sense of self. There's not additional training needs to go. Those are the qualities that a person with a high sense of self has. So if you take a quality, say that you are on the lower side with, say secrecy, you're a very secretive person. And the reason a low sense of self is secretive is, hey, if people knew who I really was, they wouldn't like me, like I don't like me, right? I got to keep things close to the vest. It's another way of doing control, controlling information. Don't let things out. Don't let people know about me. Keep things in tight. Whereas a person who has a strong sense of self, they're open about it. They don't care. Right? I am who I am. I'm comfortable with my own skin. If you see some things you don't like about me, well, maybe I can own that, and maybe that's a problem I have. If not, it's like, well, maybe you don't understand me, or maybe that's fine. We just have a difference there of opinion. I think the way this is cool. So you can take these things, say if the secretive person and says, look, I want to have a stronger sense of self. I'm going to take my secrecy. I'm going to be more open, be selective about who I'm open with, people who I can most trust, and start to share more things with them about myself. And start to test the waters a little bit and move these qualities, these traits that are on the low sense of self side of the docket and move them over to the high sense of self docket. And you see over time, if you can move a whole bunch of those, you've gone higher in your sense of self. Right? That's the bottoms up generic approach to growing a sense of self. Now the third way, besides counseling and that, is what I'll call a holistic nurturing. Nurturing of a person physically, emotionally, spiritually, and mentally. If all of those things are honored, are nurtured, are valued, there's a growing of the sense of self. It's a person now seeing that, yeah, there is something about me that's special. And how you can do that is through self-defense training, and I'm going to talk about that in detail in just a couple minutes. But first I want to talk about two other concepts, pain and control. Pain is something that affects a lot of people's lives in that they don't want it, right? They're risk averse, they don't want to go where there might be pain, so they limit choices in their lives because of fear of pain. However real or not it is, there is a fear, and they're honoring their own fear and staying away from choices that they could make because there might be pain associated with it. Now, pain is not a sensation in the same way. You don't directly sense it. Like, for instance, I can see a red area. I can taste something salty. I can feel something smooth. These things are all direct senses, right? I can hear a tone. Pain is not like that. Pain is an interpretation on top of the sensation. It is a perception. And as a perception, it's under the purview of the sense of self, which can either mitigate it or amplify it. So a person with a strong sense of self, they have a high pain threshold. A person with a low sense of self tends to be hurt by a lot of things so easily. So we can see that. I'll give a clear example that makes this. If I'm someplace in a public place, imagine yourself in a public place, on a bus, in a grocery store or something, and maybe he's a creepy looking guy, is approaching you, sort of bumps you, and maybe pinches you in a kind of a private area, at least a personal area, that you don't like. And all of a sudden, the sharks go through you, and this is horrible, this is painful experience. Ew, get this guy arrested, assault, whatever. If your loved one, your spouse, whoever, someone very close, pinches you in that exact same place, in that exact same way, identical sensation, physical sensation is exactly the same. There it might be, oh yeah, pleasurable. Same sensation, different perception. Pain in one, pleasure in the other. Those are interpretations we make on sensations. There are perceptions. They are owned and operated by the sense of self, at least largely so. Now, pain, properly understood, is an ally. Pain tells us, oh, whoa, I think I'm about to be hurt, or I'm about to be hurt. I'm in the process of being hurt, or I've just been hurt. It directs our attention to attend to something that needs attention, right? If you were just hurt, you need to attend to what that injury is. If you are about to be hurt, you might want to avoid what that situation is. If you're in the process, maybe you can stop the process before you get hurt. So pain is an ally. It does very good stuff for us. If you did not experience pain, there is a medical condition called congenital insensitivity to pain, CIP. It's very rare. Only a few people have it. But if you have that situation, have that condition, you never experience pain. What happens for those people is they're at high risk of hurting themselves and not knowing, right? They'd be talking and maybe blood's running down there. What's this come? Oh, I must have bit my tongue. I didn't even know. I didn't feel it. It's a danger not to be able to experience pain. So pain is not something to avoid at all cost. Pain is something that you want to have when the risk of being hurt is right there. And it's not something you need to run from. As you grow your sense of self, it's something that you can honor, respect, and learn from. That's pain. Second one I wanted to talk about is control. Who in your life can you control? Can you control your kids? Your parents? Your co-workers? Siblings? You know, you might temporarily, short amount of time, physically be able to control somebody, grab them and pull them someplace, right? There's a physical control you can exert for a short amount of time. But other than that, you can't control anybody. The best you can do is control your response to stimuli around you. But in terms of controlling others, no. That's not real. That's an illusion. Control over others is an illusion. If you try to live with an illusion, you're living outside the real world. That's limiting, right? You need to embrace the real world, be part of the real world, not in your own internal reality that doesn't match what the external reality is. So relationships where there's control issues, that's the most common thing that happens. And, people say money. Well, money's about control too. Who's spending this? Who wants that? You can't stop me from buying this, whatever. Those are control issues. And they're at the root of almost every relationship problem because they're trying to concern controlling somebody else. Not honoring them as the center of their own universe, but seeing them as a pawn or a player at most in my world. That's disrespectful. That's what control is. So being able to release the desire for control is the positive move. It's one of these things that moves you from the low sense of self to the higher sense of self. Less desire for control. Now, I want to talk about this third way of growing the sense of self, the main purpose of this program. There's at least 6 ways that training in martial arts, the one that we're going to be training in, helps grow the sense of self. First is through achievements. So in this training, what you'll be able to do is take down somebody who's bigger than you. Throw somebody who's bigger than you. Break wood. Fly temporarily by jumping over some things that you didn't think you can jump over. Jump as high as you can and fall. Face down or back down and not get hurt. These pieces are sort of Superman stuff, right? This goes back to that first thought-feeling experiment. When you've got these capabilities you didn't know you have. This is surfacing the powers of Superman that are within to some degree, right? So when you have those things, now the sense you had of a stronger sense of self when you were Superman, that starts to bleed in. That's one way it grows the sense of self. A second way is, this is very cool, in the self-defense techniques we do, the Hoshin-su that we do, you will be engaged with one another it does take at least 2 people. It's good to have as many or rotate through, but you need at least 2 people for doing this, these exercises. So let's say it's you and me right now. If I am working with you and I am attacking you and you're going to apply some self-defense technique to me, I'd be grabbing hold of you and we'd say, well, you're going to take me this way and bend me that way and try to lock this or pressure point someplace here. As we're working that, and maybe it's the first time we've doing it, we're engaged in extended contact. Unlike like a taekwondo or karate where it's just pop, pop, a kick or a punch, this is hold, grips, whether we're twisting or squeezing or whatever we're doing, but there's an extended contact. And then there's this mental piece of it. It's like, well, that's not really bothering me. Maybe you need to twist, maybe you need to hold it that way. Oh, okay, wait, now I'm starting to feel it. So there's mental engagement that's going on. Then beyond those, in order to do this technique correctly, I have to be willing to go into pain for you so we know that the technique is working. Right? It needs to be something that's going to stop an attacker. It needs to be something that injects pain into the person. So I have to be willing to go into pain for you and also be willing to surrender control of my body to you. Right? Go ahead and bend it that way. I'm not going to try to pull my arm away until you see what you got it right. Right? You, on the other hand, have to accept these gifts that I'm offering. of going into pain and surrendering control. If you no, I don't want to hurt you, I don't want to control you. No, you have to accept those in order to learn. So being gracious about accepting these offered gifts, then I will depend on you. I will trust in you. I will signal you some way, a tap or something that says, okay, that's enough. I'm feeling it. It's working. Please stop. And you honor my trust by releasing the hold, the grip. So now we're working, not just at the mental and the physical and getting this thing right. We're working now at the emotional and the spiritual levels that we're connecting. And when I'm giving these things to you, I'm opening myself up to give in a very important fundamental way. And you, in your acceptings, are honoring me by accepting these wonderful gifts. When I'm doing that for you, I'm telling you, without words, hey, there's something about you that I'm willing to give these wonderful gifts to. That we are connecting, that you are valid, that you are valued, and I'm willing to give these things to you. This is the nurturing that's going on. And for you willing to accept that, that's a nurturing back of me. And when you honor my trust, that's an honoring of me, it's a respect of me. So now we're connecting on all levels, and then we switch. And you attack me, and I defend and apply the technique to you. So you then are willing to go into pain for me. You then are willing to surrender control of your body. You then are trusting in me. And I am accepting your gifts and honoring your trust. And we make these connections, and we do that with whomever we're working with. And now you're getting this over and over again. You are a valued person that people are willing to give to. People are willing to accept your gifts. People are willing to honor you and trust in you. It's very powerful. That's the second way that training in this, in Hapkido, can grow the sense of self. A third way is what I was just talking about with trust. People have a lot of times have difficulty with trusting. I mean, if you have a low sense of self, you're on guard. And maybe the people you were choosing to put trust in were not particularly trustworthy people. So you've got reason not to trust. So you're secretive, and people have a hard time knowing what to trust in if you're going to be secretive about it. When you're doing these techniques, you have to be trusting in people, and they immediately have to be responsive to your request for, of being trusted, right? You tap out and they stop. So it's instantaneous. Please stop, and they honor it. So now you are being validated, like you can trust in others, and they will honor that trust in you over and over and over again. A dozen or more times in every session that we do. A fourth way in which this approach helps grow the sense of self is the notion of pain. So, if I'm willing to, I'm attacking you, you're going to put a technique on me. If I don't want to go there, I'm going to try to short it. You might say, well, this is supposed to hurt, so I'm going to try harder a different way. That's the way you can get hurt. You have to be willing to go into pain, and you have to be willing to surrender control of your body. So if I say, okay, no, I'm feeling it now. If you press harder, okay, that's good. I can go a little bit more, and pain becomes less and less something to fear because I'm more and more comfortable with it. It's not something that scares me at all. I go into pain a dozen or more times every class, right? It's not a big deal. And there's no hurt going on because the person stops. Now, there may be an occasional somebody went too far, fell, or whatever like that. That can happen. It can happen in anything. But generally speaking, when we're training, nobody's getting hurt, but everybody's going into pain. But that's cool because of the value that we're getting from going into pain. The fifth benefit of this type of training for the sense of self is a notion of control, right? I have to surrender control. If I fight that, then I start to get at risk of somebody's going to overcompensate for me not letting them extend my arm. I'm trying to keep it short, so they're going to do something different, maybe yank it harder, and I wasn't expecting that, or we get in a full-fledged confrontation about it. Not so cool. So surrendering control and seeing that benefits accrue from that. I don't have to be in control. I don't have to try to control the other. And here's another person willing to give control of their physical being to me. The notion of control becomes something that, that's not that big a deal. And in life, it's rare that you can control things, other people for sure. the best you can do is be controlling yourself in your responses to situations. Here you can see it's okay. I don't even have to be in control of my own physical body. I can surrender that to somebody else, and I'll trust them, and they will honor my trust. It's very powerful. That's the fifth way that this type of training helps grow the sense of self. And then there's one more, the sixth one. And that is, at its core, self-defense. Training in self-defense means the self is worth defending. Right? If you see yourself as garbage or crap or something, you're not worth anything, you're worthless. And that's your internal. You wouldn't say that because that's the scariest thing to do is admit that. But it may be inside. You cover it with smiles or arrogance or whatever it might be. But if that's what the core feeling is, why would you defend yourself if somebody attacks you? Why are you going to protect garbage or crap, right? You won't. Let them have it. There's nothing there to take. Let them take whatever they want, right? If you are willing to train in self-defense, you're saying, no, this self is a treasure worth defending. And I'm learning ways to defend that self. So at its core, it's an honoring of the self, which is an honoring of the sense of self. Now, that's the seminar portion of this program. And normally what I'll do in classes, in individual ones, we'll do a couple, three pieces. Talk a little bit about the sense of self that can enhance understanding of it. We'll work on techniques, escapes and falls and self-defense techniques. And we'll also, I will also propose an exercise you can do. They're always optional, but they're valuable. I find them valuable. And I'm going to suggest that after this seminar, you do the first optional exercise, which was another attachment here. It's the characteristics of a sense of self, strong and a weak. I'm going to ask you to do a self-assessment to see where you are at the start of this program. So there's two versions of the list. One of them is just a straight-up list. The second one is with a way that you can give yourself a score. And you keep it private. You can share with others if you wish, but you can just keep it private as well. I've had people that do both. But I strongly recommend that you do that exercise. But again, they're all optional. So I'm going to close with a Chinese proverb. It's a wonderful proverb. Fits a lot of things. It fits this. It goes like this. I hear and I forget. I see, I might remember. I do, and I understand. I'm going to ask you to engage yourself in these exercises, engage yourself with another so you can learn the techniques. You need at least one other person to work with to learn these techniques. And I will be back with separate classes. Thank you for being here. Kamsahamnida. Toodles.